everyone, welcome to the latest edition of the Front Page, and joining me, Lee Mottershead, in the Racingpost studio today are my colleagues Jonathan Harding and betting editor Keith Melrose. Gentlemen, did you enjoy a fruitful Cheltenham weekend?
Cheltenham wasn't so good for me. I had my better results were at Fontwell.
Did you really?
Yeah. Slipway's a horse that might be going somewhere this season. I don't know if you saw the Southern National yesterday. That was quite an impressive performance.
Okay.
Good to see a nice advert for some provincial nationals actually, because he'd won the Highland National the time before, and now he's won the Southern National, and he's on his way hopefully to Aintree.
What I should do is a quiz question. I should ask you, Jonathan, to run through as many names of the provincial nationals as you can, because there are a lot of them these days.
Yeah, maybe. I can get as far as London.
We'll leave that one out then. We'll do that next week with more rehearsal. Right, on the show this week, three very different sorts of stories. How do you fancy going to see one of Jump Racing's great winter classics and then heading off to enjoy a thriller-second roller coaster ride, a trip to the circus and a mulled wine? You can do that at Newbury next week, and it hasn't gone down universally well. That winter classic is the Coral Gold Cup, one of the sport's top handicaps, and one of the races in which the BHA handicapping team has been trying to ensure that British and Irish horses have a fair chance of winning. How well are they doing? And it isn't only horses' ratings that go up and down, so too the stallion fees and the fees for two of these supersized Dubawi and Frankel have just soared. It is not, however, only the owners of those supersized who've never had it so good, as we shall explain later in the show. Okay then, let us start with Jonathan Harding. Jonathan, Newbury have been saying ho ho ho. Some of their customers have said no, no, no.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Brilliant. So this is the story that Newbury has installed a Winter Wonderland style carnival in the middle of the course, which will be open between November 27th and January the 3rd. But with early access for people who go to the Coral Gold Cup meeting on the Friday and Saturday. It has not gone down particularly well with some racegoers. A few have written into us to say that it's likely to impede the view of the back straight. It's a distraction. Why is Newbury not completely focused on the racing and bringing in what they consider to be a sideshow that detracts away from the core product, as it were? I do slightly sympathise with Newbury. I mean, we've been tracking attendances throughout the year. They are going the wrong way, generally speaking. And racecourses are not averse to the sort of economic factors that are affecting all of us, the cost of living crisis and things like that. So I understand the impulse to diversify their revenue stream. It's happening all over with concerts and things like that. And it's important that we're trying to get people into racing and offering things that aren't purely about the action on the track for people who maybe need a soft introduction to it. At the same time, anything that detracts from the racing is a big no-no for me, and if it is impeding the view, if it is taking away from the action on the track in any way, then it needs to be carefully looked at, I think. And time will tell whether this is something a concept that works. I'm not convinced that it is, but fair play for trying something anyway.
I guess Newbury first started, they first revealed this a few weeks ago now, and when they did, they announced it as a really positive thing. They were very excited about it, and I think they thought that the industry would get excited about it, and maybe the industry will. I suppose we'll maybe learn more tomorrow. They've got a gallop this morning at Newbury, haven't they, for their winter carnival, and I don't know if all the infrastructure will be up there. There's a big wheel, there's a circus, there's roller coaster rides, which could obscure the views, because a lot of the viewing steps at Newbury are quite low to the ground. It's tricky, isn't it, Keith? Because I mean, in some ways, this is a bit like music nights. A lot of racegoers, traditional racegoers, don't like the idea of music nights because they don't want to be impeded by McFly fans when they're trying to get their bets on. But I guess at least with music nights, they take place after racing.
That's right.
I suppose the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating, isn't it? In terms of whether the enjoyment of the day at the races is impacted by the stuff in the middle of the racecourse.
Yeah, and if you get people through the door who are having at least an incidental interaction with the racing is what you want. I mean, you say music festivals are after racing. I've been to one meeting in America. It was the Preakness one year, and I could have seen Pitbull in the infield. There was a literal
During racing?
Yeah, there was a literal music festival on. Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, if you remember, you're probably a bit young for all that, but you know, Pitbull was headlining, and yeah, so that was that was what you got in this infield during racing at a major race day in the States. So none of this stuff's new particularly, but Newbury, I think I've never actually been Newbury for racing. I've been to Newbury racecourse several times, but never been when the race is on. But it's quite a good viewing track if you get it right, and to lose that element of your product seems a little bit must have been considered, surely.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that Newbury, the track's looking at it and working out how it was talking about haven't quite minimising the visual impact was the sort of corporate response, which basically means maybe shimmying a few things about and making sure there's more big screens up so people are able to watch the racing. I mean, the general point, I find the attitude of, no, we don't want music after, we don't want these events during, it should all be about the racing, slightly antiquated, because beggars can't be choosers, and ultimately attendances are low, and racing can't say, well, we want a certain type of racegoer but not others. That's not going to work long term. But I understand the point that they have to work harmoniously, and the sense is that this might not, but like we say, the proof will be in the pudding.
Is there going to be a big Ferris wheel and a roller coaster, you were saying?
Yeah.
Is it really?
Big wheel, roller coaster.
Santa's Grotto.
Santa's Grotto.
What do you think will be
ice skating.
Really? Ice skating?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big... The people doing it are the people that look after the Edinburgh Christmas market, which is fantastic. Yeah, I bought a nice jacket from that last year. They do stuff in Leicester Square, elsewhere across London. So it's a proper...
So it's that group. It is a company that does lots of those.
Yeah, so it's being sold as the biggest sort of Christmas extravaganza in the South. And it sounds like it could be a really good thing. And actually, if you're going racing next Friday or Saturday, you can go racing and you can get an early sight of it, because it doesn't actually start until after the Winter Carnival. But you can go racing, say, watch the long distance hurdle, watch the Coral Gold Cup, and then go off and have an ice skate.
That company will have promised Newbury big revenue, won't they? They'll have the history, the track record that company's got. Yeah. You know, it'll be that'll been sold as an extremely good money spinner for Newbury, and I'm sure it will be.
And at a time when racecourses, as you say, attendances aren't universally great across racecourses, and those who aren't locked into fuel deals are facing massive increases in their gas and electric going forward, you can see why they do it. And there are precedents too for racecourses where you can't see all the action. I mean, I'd go to Doncaster for the Ledger and the big days there, and if you watch from even high up in the grandstands, you can't see a great part of the back straight because of the trees there. So you do miss out on the action. And I guess with Newbury, some of this has kicked off because their first jumps meeting was beset by problems in terms of there was no big screen because of ground conditions they couldn't install. So that got people off in a bad mood. And Newbury as a racecourse is a racecourse that's had a few difficult PR issues.
Certainly with trainers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Prize money, and so I can just imagine the response from trainers who are critical of the track anyway for the money it puts up, and they see this sort of money spinner in the middle. I can see why that's probably not the best look with professionals, but you know, it's one of those where I can understand it, but it has to be done. You have to get it perfectly right, otherwise it comes off horribly.
I did think that Corach Rambler was going to be the diciest ride I saw at Newbury next week, but it sounds like maybe that's not going to be the case.
I thought my ho, 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 no, no, no was going to be the best line of this segment. I was absolutely wrong. So our second story involves some serious numbers. We heard last week that we had an introductory first stallion fee for the world's top racehorse Flightline, $200,000, huge number for a first season stallion, but I guess you can understand it given the hype around him. But we also had news of stallion fees in Britain and Ireland last week. A raft of studs came out with their announcement, and two of the most interesting ones concerned Newbury and Frankel. Newbury, who continues to have enormous success on the racecourse. His fee has gone from $250,000 to £350,000. Well, Frankel, again, having enormous success, goes from $200,000 to £275,000. Now, it should be said that those studs, the Godolphin and Jumpman Enterprises, have also lowered some stallion fees, as have a lot of other studs when increasing stallion fees as well. So some things go up, some things go down, but there's no doubt that if you're connected to those stallions, you are experiencing a major ka-ching moment. And I think it's contextualised by saying as well that whilst we have a feeling at times that people in British racing are universally suffering, that definitely isn't the case. There are still some people making big money out of British racing, and that's not said begrudgingly, you want people to succeed. If you're a breeder at Book One at Tats and other sales in recent weeks, some of those have had enormous successes. The sales houses, Tats in particular, had an amazing Book One with unprecedented numbers and therefore unprecedented commission as well. If you're a bloodstock agent, you're having a wonderful time right now with some of those returns at the major auction houses, and some trainers and jockeys doing really well too. Keith, are we generally, do we paint a picture of the sport sometimes that suggests that everybody is doing badly when in reality they're not?
Yeah, it's as in life a little bit, isn't it? People, if you've got a lot of money to begin with, you can, best way to make a small fortune start with a big one, or the opposite way around really. But you've got, at the top end, those figures are going up an awful lot. Is there a little bit there of filling the vacuum that's been left a few years ago by Galileo a little bit as well? We don't have Galileo as an alternative now. And those, I think 350,000 for Dubai is the highest stallion fee I've ever heard of.
Astonishing, isn't it?
It is really, really high, but he is probably the best stallion in the world.
Yeah.
Flightline was a really interesting one as well. That's higher than Frankel was when he went to stud. He was 150, I think.
200,000, astonishing numbers.
Yeah, it was 170 with the current exchange rate is probably more than £170,000. And I don't know, does inflation apply to these people? Does it? Because Frankel was 10 years ago now. He went to stud for 150. So it's a really, really high figure on Flightline. And at least Dubai and Frankel are demonstrably the two sort of best stallions going. Really interesting as well, because we know in the breeding side there's a lot of clamour for precocity and getting 2-year-olds in there and whatever. But these stallions, these aren't 2-year-old stallions really.
Which is good.
It is very good.
Yeah.
Noni Never, I looked at his figure, he's obviously the preeminent speed stallion in Europe at the moment, and he's 140 now, I think he's gone up to, which is still a significant chunk, but he's still half a Frankel. He's still, not even half a Dubawi. So it's great that the top stallions are still the ones that Europe do so well. We do middle distance better. It's an argument Tom Siegel makes all the time. You're obsessed with speed. We do middle distance better than anybody in the world in Europe. And we should celebrate that. And it seems that when it comes to the hard game of numbers and money, that's still reflected in these stud fees.
And we should protect that middle distance heritage as well.
As much as we can. Yeah, I mean, there's modernisation to be done. I know Alan Sweetman in particular talks about reducing the distance of the Irish Derby and maybe emphasising 10 a little bit more than 12 furlongs. But you can make changes around the edges, is what I'm saying. But I think in the actual central ethos should be to protect the middle distance programme, and the sort of the status these stallions are enjoying, unprecedented status, is hopefully reflecting that.
Jonathan, you covered the Flightline story. Was that 200,000 number what you expected?
I think it was probably in the correct region. I mean, I spoke to a couple of bloodstock agents who were intimating it would be somewhere between 150 and 200. So when I was trying to work out the figure before we knew the figure, I was sort of working on a premise of 175,000 with the proviso that they might just push it, given 2.5% went for $4.6 million. I mean, he's clearly, it puts him in the region of, I think American Pharaoh, correct me if I'm wrong, might have been $200,000. Justify, I think, started at 150, Triple Crown winners. So it's not a million miles off where it ought to be. The staggering thing is if he covers between 150 and 250 mares at 200,000, you're looking at 30 to $50 million. And suddenly 4.6 million for 2.5% doesn't look actually like the worst investment in the world, bizarrely.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it? I mean, when I was going, I'm sure when you were as well, the general norm was that a stallion would cover 40 mares. That was the thing. It was you divided a stallion into 40 shares and 40 mares. But these days, if you find yourself with a top stallion, if you're Darley Godolphin with Dubai, if you're Juddmonte with Frankel, the potential riches involved are just colossal.
Absolutely. I mean, the shuttle sum as well now, so you can get 2 breeding seasons out of them. And it's what's the standard for a flat sire? These is 150, 200, they reckon.
Yeah, and sometimes upwards.
I mean, that was the is that upwards now? Because
sometimes.
I remember when I was
250 is a lot. Justify covered 250, which I think was the joint most in the US that year. So he's an outlier, really.
That was what jump sires would cover when I came into racing 15 years ago. A jump stallion would cover 250 mares or even a little bit more. Yeah. And now the flat sires, these top flat sires are doing that. You know me.
But in turn, it follows that those covering fees are set because, in general terms, if you're sending a mare to one of those stallions, you can have a very good chance of making a profit when that goes to the ring. Which again underlines that a lot of the breeders at the moment in Britain and Ireland are also having a wonderful time. And the bloodstock agents with the commission every time. I was speaking to someone at Cheltenham on.
We're not hearing from them, so they know that things are going well for them.
Well, that's it, isn't it? The people who are doing well, who are making huge money, huge profits, tend not to talk about it. But the ones who aren't.
So we hear from owners who are struggling to get prize money for their horses they've got in training. But bloodstock agents and breeders are making money hand over fist. They're quite happy.
This is it. You talk about whether it's sort of reflective of the health of the industry and people are down on it. But British and Irish racing has always sort of got that first bit right. We have the stallions, and as long as we have the stallions, that's a very good grounding for a healthy industry. The problem sort of arises when how many of those horses and the offspring or the product of these matings, how many of them are going to race in Britain and Ireland, how many are going to go to foreign buyers abroad, how is that going to be reflected on the track and beyond? It's almost like the first bit of the circle's there. And so long as British racing has the pedigrees, has the stallions, it's going to have a fairly good starting position. It's just the bits after that that's the issue with prize money and all these things that we go on about. So it's a good sign, of course. It's one of the sort of key lights on the dashboard, is it? It's one of the key indicators of a healthy industry is solid bloodstock grounding, good exports, but you don't want to go too far down the export route that the racing suffers.
You don't. Funny enough, I touched on both those points in the column today. In terms of the exports and that talent drain, that clearly is extremely real. But I think sometimes we look at it in a blinkered way. A lot of the horses, particularly, have been going to Australia, and I saw a lot last 2 or 3 weeks. You know, the Solcombs and my Oberons, Zaki, Uncle Brim won a huge pot at Cranbourne on Saturday. They've gone not so much because the prize money over here is rubbish, but because for owners in Australia, the potential prize money they can win over there, and also at the same level. You know, a horse like Zaki was never going to win Group 1 races in Britain. My Oberon was probably never going to reach Group 1 level in Europe, but he probably can in Australia. I think sometimes we focus slightly too much on our inadequate prize. It clearly needs to rise. And equally, you look at Godolphin, they spent £26 million on yearlings at Book 1 of the Tats October sale. If you look in general terms, the percentage rises across that sale were colossal. And yes, some will leave Britain, but many of those, certainly all the Godolphin horses you'd imagine, will race in Britain. The prize money hasn't gone up by the rates that the price of the yearlings has gone up, but it hasn't stopped them buying those yearlings to race in Britain.
That's because prize money doesn't matter to Godolphin.
Exactly. Stallions.
Exactly. The thing with horses going to Australia and competing, that's just a problem that we see in wider society too. It's globalization, but for horses. Yeah. You know, the ability to transport those horses to race in Australia, it's far lower activation than it would have been years ago. So that's why that's happening, and it's going to be inevitable. And it's not in itself a cause for panic. No, we're very lucky to have, you know, extremely wealthy owners in this country that are going to keep their horses here. We'd be in trouble otherwise because the incentive to race them wouldn't be there. It's because we've got these stallions that are so well suited to the individual, to the way of racing in Europe. You know, if all of a sudden we laid dirt everywhere in Europe, Rankle and Dubawi's fees they'd be worthless as stallions. Yeah. We saw that in America when they experimented with artificial surfaces over there. They rode back because they immediately saw that AP Indy and Lemon Drop Kid and all the prominent sires over there at the time were immediately worthless if that happened. So it's another case for preserving what we've got here because, as Jonathan says, with those guys in place, we've got the bedrock of a really and a continually healthy industry, but we need to keep the infrastructure there around them too.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. What you have there is what some people might think, 3 journalists being very positive about the state of the racing industries here and in Ireland. And if you are a sales company, a major breeder or a bloodstock agent, you've got reason to be very positive indeed at the moment. Right, for story number 3, we have numbers of a different kind of numbers guru, Keith Melrose.
Hello. Yes. We had a story, the BHA handicapping review continues. I wouldn't say apace because it's been 18 months now. And, you know, no need to rush these things, and it's going to take a long time to correct, which is precisely the point of the story, really. Scott Burton's covered it. It's in today's paper, I believe. Yeah. And it talks about how the parity, they're trying to achieve some parity between Irish and British horses in handicaps. And the headline figures that they've been quite happy to trumpet and are absolutely right to is that the Irish horses, Scott's piece has infographics showing impact values. What they show is that Irish horses used to have about a 30 to 40% greater chance than average of winning a British handicap. That's come down now to about 10%. And that's probably a healthy equilibrium because we should assume that Irish horses that come here, there's a bit of a selection bias involved. They're coming here because they think British handicaps are less competitive and whatnot. So I think if we had 1-to-1, where both exactly performed as you'd expect, that's actually a bit against the Irish horses coming over. They'd think, why would they bother?
Yeah.
But that story is an element of it's really positive. And the BHA's handicapping team, who, to be fair to them, in fact, it's really admirable. They've decided this was an issue and they wanted to sort it. Not many would decide once they saw an issue to put hands up and say, right, we need to sort this out.
They've been quite transparent, haven't they?
They have been very transparent, and the report that I read in full when it came out on Wednesday, we got a little advance look before it was released publicly. It was statistically really sound as well. I was quite impressed with it as a piece of work, data-wise. The only bit that I thought was actually the more interesting, nerdy part of the story. Yes, the news story is the Irish-British parity, but I thought the most interesting bit of it was they talked about how hurdles ratings have been changed. They've basically achieved what they wanted to with the hurdles figures.
Yeah.
But on the chase figures, they've really not managed to move the dial that much. And they've sort of made it out that they've done 50% of the job now. It's a little bit low, like promising, saying, I'm going to lose a stone. And the first half stone comes off pretty easily and you go, the rest will come. Don't you worry about that. But the second half's the really difficult bit to do. The chasing bit is going to be really hard for them. They need to show a lot of discipline. What's going to happen? Well, I had a little look last night on the BHA's ratings database. It's another bit of really good open data. You can download all ratings every week off the BHA site. And I do it sometimes when I'm having a little play around for stuff for research. So I took all the horses that had both a hurdle and the chase mark on the BHA database. There were 669 as of the last update last Tuesday. And of those horses, 440 had the same hurdles mark as chase mark. So that's 2/3 of them had the same hurdles mark as chase mark. Now, we saw in the BHA's figures that the average hurdler getting a first time mark, the average has gone down from 107.95, so 108 to all intents and purposes, to like 100.84.
Yeah, about
so
£7.
So 100, so it's half a stone less
Yeah.
an average hurdler's getting when they start over in hurdles. What are they going to do when they take that mark to fences? You know, we've seen that 2/3 of horses with the marks in both have the same mark. They're well handicapped chasers by definition, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah.
By quite a long way. And you get horses that can go straight from novice hurdles into handicapped chases off that hurdles mark. There's nothing to stop them.
Chris Gordon horse at Cheltenham on
Yeah,
Friday.
exactly. They do it all the time. They do it in novice handicaps most of the time, but it would be multiple times a week, you see them going straight into open handicap chases. They're very well handicapped horses because the hurdles dial shifted and the chase dial hasn't.
Right.
These horses, say they win by 10 lengths on the bit because they're well in to begin with and they've got a very good record on a long-standing basis. Unexposed hurdlers going straight over fences. What are the handicappers going to do then? Are they going to raise the young horse £10, just going to smack £10 on that horse? And all of a sudden, that's now got a chase mark that is in the ecosystem of the chasers that's too high. So what they need to do, but is very, very difficult and needs a lot of discipline, is to hit the young horse a little bit, but also be really aggressive in dropping those other horses.
Right.
Because otherwise it's going to be really difficult to solve the second part of this problem. And I can see in the medium term being real issues with horses going hurdles to fences in the meantime. It's not, as I say, it's not beyond the wit of the man, and I've got every faith in him doing a really thorough job to try and do it. But I worry because the easy option is to perpetuate what's currently happening in the chase division, and they'll do well to ever sort it.
So with the chase division then, is the BHA's handicapping team almost a victim of its own success with its work in the hurdling division?
Yeah, they've done, it's easier to do the hurdles because you give the hurdlers a mark straight off. You know, they don't have an existing national hunt mark. And they've done that job. That's actually the easier job to do. And they've done a good job in it. It was identified as a clear issue. It's been an issue for 10 years. And they sorted it in 18 months. Absolutely, kudos, bang on. It's a really good job done. Chases are going to be so much more difficult. And as somebody that really prizes the chase program, as people will know, you know, they know I love to tip in chases and bet in chases. It's going to be a real issue. It's going to, the way that it's going to be, I wouldn't want to be the guy solving it. What I would do, it's a long-standing thing of mine, I'd put a moratorium on horses taking their hurdles marked straight into handicap chases.
Okay.
The mechanism for that, you could toss around various ideas, but at the moment, there's nothing to stop a horse running in 3 novice hurdles, getting their mark, which is now on average half a stone lower, going straight into a chase where marks are roughly where they were, and immediately that's a £5 allowance for £5 to £7 potentially, because the chase marks have moved a little bit. The hurdles are £7 lower, the chasers are only a little bit lower. So there's an allowance straight off for these hurdlers, and yeah, I would stick a moratorium on doing that, to be honest, while this BHA sort this out, because otherwise it's going to be they're making a really difficult job for themselves.
It's a fascinating analysis. Jonathan, what's your take on what the BHA have done here? Because again, as we said earlier on to Keith, the transparency of it is really welcome, isn't it? Because it's such a complex
Can't stress
issue.
that enough.
Yeah.
It's really been admirable how transparent and open they've been, and the data they're putting out is of genuinely decent quality. So it's really kudos. I don't want to feel like I'm having a go at them for
No.
this. But all I want to stress is the easy bit. They've done a really good job on the easy bit. The hard work starts now, I think.
Yeah. What's your take on it, Jonathan?
Well, similarly to Keith, I think there was so much head scratching at the end of the 2020 and 2021 festival of how you bridge the gap to the Irish. It looked insurmountable. So the fact that they've held their hands up, admitted it wasn't quite where it needed to be, and gone about their work in a transparent way is refreshing, because you and I cover a great deal, a great many things that are less transparent, and we have to sort of probe and look. But actually, for them to be so upfront with it is good, and it means the trainers have that information as well, and there's no real uncertainty. It's very clear that this is how we're going about things, and that's to be commended.
Just one last one on this one, Keith. It's a slightly separate point. Obviously, this whole subject is about, well, the wider subject that the BHA has been talking about has been about trying to get this parity between British and Irish horses. At the moment, when you look at a handicap that contains British horses and Irish horses, do you go into it with any preconceived views about who you perceive to be better treated?
I try and judge them on their merits. I tell you what, I use RPRs a lot, racing post ratings, because they're a consistent scale. The ideal solution would be a consistent scale between Britain and Ireland, because there's a lot of cross racing these days. That would be the great solution.
And it's been talked about in the past.
It has been. It's going to be massively difficult to do.
Why?
Because it would offend one side to do anything. Okay. And I think what you would find is that I would suggest that I see more evidence of top-class skill in the British handicapper than the Irish, to be perfectly honest with you. I think the British marks would be the ones that would be by right hold sway in most cases. There's a bit more pragmatism involved in them a lot of the time. So it would inevitably put the IHRB out, and they've got no reason to change things because everything's working quite well for them at the moment. So that's probably why it isn't happening at the moment, and I'd like to see that happen. But at the moment, with lower grade races, which obviously Irish horses, is it January they can run Irish horses in lower grade British handicaps? Even on class 4s and even class 3s, I struggle to bet in those races when I'm looking at them, because I regard the Irish horses as an unknown quantity. It's partly my own ignorance. I don't watch as much Irish racing, so I won't know those horses. Come the Eider or the Scottish National, where you always get Irish horses coming across, I make the effort to get to know those horses and take them on their own merits using a standardised scale, which is what RPRs are. You know, the fact that the official ratings aren't a standardised scale is a massive drawback. Yeah. Luckily, we have private ratings companies like RPRs that can produce a standardised scale that you can compare with. But other than that, it's a lot of work for punters if that didn't exist. I'd like to see the scales sort of brought together at some point, but I think politically it's just going to be far too difficult. Yeah,
it sounds like an entirely reasonable, but perhaps sadly ambitious wish at the moment. And what we have learned in this, we don't often get many punting masterclass sessions in this program, but you've now been advised that looking at horses going from hurdles straight into a jumps handicap is the way to go. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been the way for years, to be honest, but now they've actually got another allowance on top of just being unexposed, which, you know, that's manna from heaven for punters like me, I think.
Manna from heaven. Okay, it is wrap-up time, and at this point, the host, this week myself, has to decide which should be our front page story. Now, my esteemed colleague, Mr. Harding, over there, has regularly mentioned on this programme that the host all too often picks their own story as the winning story. So on this occasion, I'm going to selflessly say that I won't pick the Rising Stallion Fee story as the winning story. And your story, Jonathan, very good story.
Thank you.
But I do think to an extent we will learn more actually next week when we go to Newbury and we see if the roller coaster obscures our view of the cross fence, which would be a real shame. So, because I found your dissection of this handicapping situation so illuminating and fascinating, which sometimes handicapping can be a dry subject, but you brought it to life, and it is important. And ultimately, we're not all punters. The vast majority of us are punters, and what you said is a big deal for punters. So I'm going to go with the handicapping story as our winning story. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So thanks to the boys, and before I say goodbye to you, I have news, which is that we have a special Black Friday offer available when you join Racing Post Members Club, the ultimate subscription for racing fans. Get unlimited access to the Racing Post digital newspaper from 9 p.m. every evening and exclusive tools to help with your punting plus great racing writing. Subscribe today using the code BLACK22 and pay just £10 per month for the first 3 months of your subscription. See the link in the video description below for further details. Do sign up, it's well worth it. Also well worth tuning in to the front page this time next week. Until then, from Jonathan, from Keith and myself, bye-bye.